Wake that ass up.
Early in the morning.
The Breakfast Club.
Morning, everybody. It's DJ NV, Jess Hilarious, Charlamagne the guy. We are the Breakfast Club. We got a special guest in the building.
Yes, indeed.
We have Dr. Judith Joseph. Welcome.
Thank you. So great to be here.
How you
Happy
feeling?
Mental Health Awareness Month.
Yes, happy Mental Health Awareness Month.
Yeah. So you have a new book out now called High Functioning: Overcome Your Hidden Depression and Reclaim Your Joy.
What does hidden depression look like?
Ooh, so hidden depression is not like the typical depression. When people think of depression, they think of someone crying, not getting out of bed. But hidden depression hides behind a mask of being pathologically productive. So imagine, a single mom working to take care of her kids, working at her job, and she cannot slow down. People depend on her. So what does she do? She shows up to work with a smile on her face. She's showing up for others, but she feels no joy. And it's something called anhedonia. It's a scientific term that I study in my lab. People don't even know it exists. So hidden depression doesn't necessarily look sad, but it doesn't feel joy. It feels empty.
Go ahead.
I have a friend who just experienced that, right? And he called me with like he had just hit the lottery though. It was unusual. I don't like to say weird. It was so unusual. He called me, he said, "Yo, I just figured something out." I'm like, "What?" He was like, "Yo, I've been depressed all this time. I'm depressed." And I'm like, why you want a steak or a cookie? Like, why are you so excited about it? Like, this is not good news. He was like, no. Like, I'm not suicidal or anything. I've just been burying myself in my work. And I am the most productive, but I'm not happy. My wife, she gets no attention from me. I'm not like mentally there for my kids. And I just found out, I was talking to my therapist and and he was diagnosed and he's depressed. Yeah. And it was so crazy because when you think of depression, you think of, the suicidal thoughts and sad, down, you can't get out of bed. He was the opposite, but he was still depressed. So I just found that out.
Wow.
Yeah, why he was happy was because there's a term in psychology called affect labeling. When you know what you're dealing with, the uncertainty of not knowing how you feel just makes you feel so stressed. You feel like, okay, maybe there's something wrong with me. What do I have to complain about? Maybe it's my fault. But when someone tells you, no, what you're experiencing is anhedonia, it's actually a scientific symptom. Many people struggle with it. Then you feel as if, okay, it's not my fault. There's a term for this. I know what I'm working with here, so I can do something about it. And as human beings, our birthright is joy. Like joy is literally built into our DNA. And if we can't access that joy, that's a problem. So just because someone's not getting out, in bed and crying all day doesn't mean that it's not a problem. We have to address this lack of joy.
How do you get out of it, right? So let's say you work with somebody who bullies you all the time, says you're Spanish when you're black, somebody who has a bad wig and you have to see it all the time. How do you get out of that place of working with them? Because you got to go to work. Why are you looking at me like that?
That's just a silly
You got to make money. So how do you get out of that? How do you
serious.
I am being serious. Because there's people that don't want to work with people. How do you get out of that?
But you know what he's doing right now? He's accessing joy.
Yes,
being playful, being comical. He is finding a way through a difficult situation by accessing joy, right? But many of us just go to work and we do.
No, but I'm being serious. But how do you if you work with somebody that you don't like, but you still need to get money? I'm not talking about Charlamagne or Jess or Loren, but when people that don't like their job.
Yeah.
But how do you continue to go through that? Because you still need money. You still got to pay for the food on the table. You still got to pay for rent. You still got to pay for your car. You still got to pay for your kids. How do you get through that? What do you tell people to do?
There's actually a term in my book called the biopsychosocial model, right? So what you're talking about and what you so eloquently said is actually a model used by every single medical student in the world, right? The biopsychosocial is like a fingerprint. We all have our fingerprints, but it's all unique. So we each have a biopsychosocial. So for example, the person you're talking about, the biopsychosocial for that person, socially, what's happening is that they're in this stressful situation. They're not supported. They're actually being, there's microaggressions, maybe macroaggressions at work. But that's just one part of why they're no longer happy. It's one of the things that's draining the science of their happiness, right? The other parts of that model are the biological. So maybe this person also has a medical condition, like, diabetes, or psychologically they have past trauma. So all of those things play into what's taking away from their points of joy. So understanding where the stressors are and what's causing you to be unhappy is important. But even within stressful situations, because I've traveled the world, over 30 countries looking at joy, even when people don't have running water, even when they're in war zones, they can still access joy.
So
Why?
find something that makes you happy regardless
Right.
of the situation.
Because joy is a survival technique. We have to access joy in order to survive, not just to thrive, but to survive. So you can find ways at work to connect with someone else. Maybe someone else is going through it with you, so you're sharing, you're venting. You know, maybe you can use a candle at work or something fragrant to stimulate the senses, or make sure that you're leaving work and having lunch like a human being instead of being in front of a screen, right? There are ways that you can access joy because it's a survival technique.
I believe that. I believe joy is a survival technique. We actually had Lizzo on and we were talking about that. But I also feel like some people fake happy and they fake joy. So what does the real joy look like?
That's why I say understand the science of your happiness. There's only one Leonard. There's only one Judith, you know, ever in the history of the universe and the future. So what is it about you that makes you joyful? And in my research lab, when we're studying joy, we're actually adding up points. For example, if you took a rest and you woke up, did you feel refreshed? That's a point. If you were hungry and you savored your meal, that's a point. If you were lonely, you connected with someone, that's a point. But the rest of the world is so busy chasing this idea of happy, right? I will be happy when I get the perfect partner. I will be happy when I pay off my debt. I'll be happy when I have a house. The science shows us that even when those things happen, we're still not happy. So we have to access the points of joy that really feed into our unique sense of happiness. For me, it's connection. If I'm busy, if I'm speaking at places, if I'm on TV all the time, and I'm not connecting with my family, I'm going to be unhappy. But for you, it could be something else.
What are the signs of hidden depression and high-functioning depression?
Yeah, so many people confuse high-functioning depression with burnout. The difference is that, you know, for burnout, let's say you go to a party and you say, I'm burnt out. People are like, oh, me too, me three, right? But if you walk into a party and you say, I'm depressed, people are like, oh, you should do something about that, right? Like your friend, right?
Yeah,
I got cocaine right here. All we got to do is snip it.
So when you think about burnout, right? Burnout by definition is an occupational hazard. When the WHO, the World Health Organization, classified it, it's the workplace causing the symptoms. So technically, you take the person out of the workplace, they should get better. With high functioning folks, even when you take them out of the workplace, they're not better. What are they doing? They're busying themselves on a side hustle or two. They're taking on somebody's problems. They can't sit still. They're cleaning out their house or their garage, right? Because it's not the workplace. It's not something on the outside. It's something inside that's unresolved. So this hidden trauma, this unresolved pain, so they're trying to outrun it by busying themselves. So when they sit still, they feel empty. When they're not working, they feel restless.
Let me ask you a question. I feel like, and this is a good thing, but I also feel like it's a bad thing. I feel like in the last 10 years, so many people have been talking about all these mental health issues and terms. Does it sometimes feel like it's an overload? Because it's like, you know, you get a pain, right? You Google it, and then there's 30 things that's wrong with you. Now you're even more confused, right? Is that the same thing with sometimes with a lot of these terms? Like when you hear certain things, is now I'm depressed. Now I'm a high functioning depressed. Now I have anxiety. Now I have this. Is it like, do you feel like it's too much for people? And how can people really break that all down and realize what they really have and what's really bothering them? Because everything sounds the same at some time.
I mean, it's a great question, but the term affect labeling in psychology shows us that when you can name it appropriately, right, it decreases the anxiety. Think about if you were in a room and it was pitch black and you heard a loud crash. Some of us would start swinging, some would start screaming, some would start running. But if you turn that light on and you saw what it was, a vase fell or some inanimate object, you feel relaxed. Right? Why? Because you know what you're dealing with.
Know what it is, right?
It's the not knowing and not naming appropriately that creates a lot of anxiety. So people end up just drinking a lot, right, to soothe that thing because they don't know what it is. Or they end up gambling or spending a lot of money or doing things, busying themselves to outrun this pain they don't understand.
Right.
And it's interesting, too, because, you know, I think what Envy is speaking to me anyway, is the fact that there was a time when nobody used to talk about their mental health issues. So we went from saying we don't speak about this at all to, in order to eradicate the stigma, we got to tell our story. So now people are not just going out there to get help and understanding what they're dealing with, they're telling their stories.
They're telling their story, but still the older generations are not as open, right? The younger ones, they want to talk about it. They want to feel seen. They want to feel connected. And many of them do sometimes inappropriately use a label to connect, right? But there's still a lot of stigma. You know, the places I go, the corporations I go to, it's still more accepted to say burnt out than depressed. But we have to name what it is because the supports are going to look very different. The resources look very different.
Now, how do you know the difference between somebody who's staying busy as a response to trauma to somebody who's actually really busy?
Yes, great question. It's the anhedonia. You know, when you ask someone who's busy, but they're actually pathologically productive, they're not getting joy. You know, they end up at my office in Manhattan and they're like, I don't know what's wrong. Everything looks good on the outside, but I just don't feel joyful. Whereas someone who's actually engaged in what they're doing, they got the pep in their step. They're engaged and they're connected and they're feeling as if they're getting a sense of purpose. Versus when you keep doing over time without actually tapping into purpose, you do feel numb. You're like, why am I doing this? But you cannot stop because you're trying to outrun something that you don't even know is there.
Now you talked about, you know, working and being at rest. So how do you know when you're at rest and okay with being at rest?
One of the points of joy that we measure in my research lab is actually that it's called psychomotor agitation. It's a terrible scientific term, but what it means is that you can't sit still. You're just on edge. And when you add up points of joy, being able to be calm and not stressed is actually a point that many of us leave on the table. We often think, oh, that's anxiety, not depression. But no, it's almost like a different side of the same coin, right? You can't be joyful if you're stressed. Do you know anyone who's been really stressed out who is like also joyful? No. And look at the monks in other countries and the gurus. They may have just a mat to sleep on and bread and water, but they are joyful because they're at peace. So if you're not feeling that sense of peace and you have that inner restlessness, it's really difficult to be joyful.
But is everybody's peace the same peace, though?
It's not. And that's why I said understand the science of your happiness. In my book, I actually have that model so that I democratize this information. Why are just the doctors and medical students holding on to this? Every patient that comes to my lab draws their own biopsychosocial, right? So you want to figure out, what are the things that are taking away from my happiness, right? If you don't understand what's taking away their points of joy, how can you understand the science of your happiness? So in some cases, you're going to look at the social factors, right? Someone who is partnered with somebody who's toxic, I mean, they could eat all the kale they want. They're still going to be unhappy, right? Versus somebody who, let's say, psychologically, they dealt with a lot of trauma in their childhood, neglected, abused. We need to address that first because it's really hard to access joy when you're in fight or flight. And then biologically, let's say if there's someone who has an autoimmune condition, right? If you're constantly in a state of high inflammation, your brain's not going to be happy. So everyone's so unique, but we're chasing things that work for other people without understanding our own science.
And going back to what you said just a minute ago when you were saying people bury themselves in work and they have to be doing something all the time. They're always at their busiest. How do you, I don't know how to ask, like, how are you supposed to feel when you do nothing?
Yes.
Like, how are you know what I'm saying? Like, how are you supposed to feel when you just do nothing?
My clients ask me that all the time because high functioning folks have something called all or nothing thinking. When you tell them that you need to slow down, they're like, well, I can't stop. And I'm like, hold on a second. Stopping is not equivalent to slowing down. But their role, their sense of their worth is so tied closely to what they do. They feel like without their role, they are unlovable, that they are lazy, right? So we have to challenge a lot of that. And in the PTSD, the post-traumatic stress research that I do with combat veterans, what we see is that, you know, people who are triggered by things like, let's say, a situation, a person, a place, you know, they avoid those things, right? But those of us who are pathologically productive with high-functioning depression, we avoid dealing with the pain by working. So a lot of it is unpacking. What are you running from, right? You think you're chasing this goal, this happiness, but what are you actually running from, right? And the trauma response of I don't feel worthy without my role, you know, that is exactly it. They don't even realize it's tied to some past unprocessed pain. So a lot of times we spend going back in the past. I'll ask them to, you know, open up their phones or bring in old pictures so we can trace back to a time when they actually were feeling purposeful and tapping into joy. And we try to figure out and unpack what was that trauma. And then we spend a lot of time in grounding, right? Grounding techniques help you to calm that fight or flight because that busyness is you trying to outrun this past, right? So it doesn't look like flashback. It doesn't look like nightmares, but it's this busyness because you're trying to outrun your in fight or flight. But we spend a lot of time with grounding. And I talk about the techniques in my book. So they feel at ease when they sit still.
We're talking to Dr. Judith Joseph. She has a new book out, High Functioning, Overcome Your Hidden Depression and Reclaim Your Joy. What you going to say, Jess?
What if you like live here in Manhattan? You can't ground out there.
You actually,
or can you?
Great question. You know, I actually
Central Park.
That's a good one. And I taught this course, the same one I'm teaching you about at the White House, right? Talk about people who are in high stress situations at work, right? I taught them how they can actually ground at their desk. And there's a technique called the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, right? You can do it with a beverage like a coffee or a tea. But what you do is you sit, and for 5 minutes every day you practice this. You hold onto that tea and you list 5 things you can see. So you describe the cup, you describe the liquid, you describe your hand, the table. Like you're really describing 5 things that you see, the color, 4 things that you feel. So you feel the cup, you feel the warmth, you feel the chair, you feel the ground under your feet. 3 things that you can hear. So you may hear some wind outside, you may hear music, you may hear the sound of the beverage. 2 things that you can smell. You smell the fragrances in the cup and on you. 1 thing you can taste, you sip it. If you're doing 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 in that way, you're not thinking about your past pain. You're not getting triggered. You're not thinking about, what's happening around you. You're so present, and you're teaching your brain that you have the capacity to sit still and to be present. Because when we don't process that fight or flight, we feel disconnected from our bodies. But the grounding techniques allows us to sit still and just do nothing.
Do you need to rest to find peace?
I think so. It's one of the points of joy, excuse me. It's really difficult to access joy when you are restless. It's really difficult to access that feeling of happiness and pleasure when you're in fight or flight, right? So it's important to practice these peaceful methods.
I think I'm hung up on this one question you asked earlier. It was like, can you feel joy when you're stressed?
It's very, very difficult. It's super difficult. Like imagine when you're stressed and you're sitting eating your food. Many times we'll like finish the bowl and we don't even know we finished our plate, right? Because our brain was somewhere else. So we missed out on a point of joy, right? We weren't tasting the crunchy salad or the dressings, right?
That's crazy. Yeah. Like mostly, not even everything, because I ain't trying to sound like a client here or anything like that. But a lot of things that you're saying, like I like live this every day. Like I'll heat something up and then do something else and then forget that I'm hungry and then do it because I'm trying to keep myself busy. Like I wake up every morning at 4, being here at 6. We get done at a certain time. I go home, then I work on other businesses, and then I have an 8-month-old baby, and I have a 13-year-old son, and I'm married, and it's so many different things, right?
And the drugs.
So yeah, he does not have to put it out there like that. But yes, what I find for me, speaking of drugs, at the end of the night, a good like pre-roll, like for me, weed that calms me down. I'm able to relax and just like take a breath. But by the time that's like 12, 1 o'clock in the morning. I got to be back up at 4.
Yeah.
It's like, but I don't think I'm stressed or depressed. It's like, what the hell is going on then?
You maybe, I'm not your doctor, but a lot of people like you who have busy careers, families, a lot of responsibilities, they're caretakers, right? In my study, the first ever published in the world on high functioning depression, a lot of caretakers, a lot of caregivers, they experience that lack of joy. Why? Because they're so busy in their minds, they're so restless that they're missing out the precious baby's face in front of them who wants to snuggle with you, right? You lost a point right there, because when you snuggle, you're getting oxytocin, right? You're getting that attachment hormone. And, many times I hear a lot of people saying they're intimate with their partners and they just can't wait to get it over with because they just want to, they're missing out. That's a point of joy for human beings, right? Sleep is a point of joy, but many of us are spending our times on our phones before we go to bed. So that's disrupting our sleep. So we are losing so many points because we cannot sit still.
What about I got you some water too. What about the 5 V's? Can you break down the concept of healing with the 5 V's?
Well, the reason
Drink your water first.
Thank you. The reason I came up with the 5 V's, I got a point of joy there. To quench my thirst. Is because when I travel the world, the number 5 comes up in a lot of countries, right? So I want people to envision their hand and say to themselves, like, I am built with the DNA for joy. It is my birthright as a human. I want to reclaim it, right? And you tap it.
Envy.
Listening. Charlamagne, why you yelling at Charlamagne?
Look at your hand. He is doing
You
it.
messing up my joy.
Take this hand and do this with you. Slap some sense.
Do it again. Show me how to do it.
Look at your
So
hand.
look at your hand and envision that, you are built with the DNA for joy. It is your birthright as a human being, but sometimes we forget how to access it. So I want you to reclaim your joy, tapping into one of the 5 V's every day, right? Just one. Don't do more than 1 or 2 because that's too much. And the first one is validation. So validation is acknowledging and accepting how you feel, good or bad, without judgment, right? And you know how I said that when you don't know what you're dealing with, validation is like turn the light on in that room so you know what you're working with. You're naming the emotion, good or bad, and you're accepting it. And you can self-validate, right, to yourself. But, sometimes with my assessments, I validate through the quizzes. The quiz online that I have on my website. If you take the anhedonia quiz and you see you have a high anhedonia score, you're like, wow, I'm lacking joy. That is why I feel this way, right? And the second is venting. Venting is expressing emotion. So you could vent verbally like we are right now, or you could write in a journal or pray or dance or sing or cry. All are ways to express emotion. And in my lab, when people come in, I'll fill up a red balloon and every person would take a turn trying to put that balloon underwater, and 100% of the time it pops up. You cannot escape physics, right? So venting is, imagine if you're letting the air out of that balloon slowly over time, right? What happens if you don't let that air out is that balloon, that stress, that emotion will pop up in areas of your life that you don't want it to. It'll pop up at work, in your relationships, in your family, right? So when you let the air out over time, you're able to have that balloon glide on the water. You're more peaceful. And then the third V is values, right? So I brought in those candles for you because I value, giving back to my community. So right now I'm wearing a design from a Black designer who's a close friend of mine, Carly Cushney. And I brought candles from Harlem Candle Company, right? Because I like to give and pour back into my community. And so tap into what gives you meaning and purpose. Think priceless versus price tags. Many of us chase the things, right? We chase the clout, we chase the money. I was like that too. But you're not doing things that give you meaning and purpose. So you're missing out, right? So now I won't take a speaking engagement if I'm missing out on my time with my daughter.
We just talked about that this morning.
Yeah, because honestly, I co-parent. So I'm only going to see her for how they do the math on socials. I'm going to miss out on my time with her. That's priceless. Why would I do that? No amount of money can give me that time back, right? So really tap into things that matter. And the fourth V is vitals. What nourishes your mind, your brain, your body, right? You only get one. I tell my daughter since she was 2, how many bodies did God give you? And she always says, 1, mommy. And I said, what do you got to do with it? Take care of it. And she's known that since she was 2, right? But we treat our bodies so poorly. We criticize the way we look, but it's like I have strong legs that get me to places, right? A lot of people don't have that. So be kind to your body. Eat nourishing foods, not processed foods. Get movement in. Protect your brain from too much screen time.
Yeah.
The way that we look at our faces all the time, it's very unhealthy. When we're looking at our face on FaceTime, we're looking on Zoom, super unhealthy. It's causing a lot of stress. We weren't meant to look at our face that much, right?
Really?
We weren't. There's a term in psychiatry called the autoscopic phenomenon. So people who are psychotic with schizophrenia, they'll see images of themselves across the room and it creates a lot of anxiety for them and depression. We're doing that to ourselves.
And that's why filters exist, because that's a better way to look at yourself. And know a lot of women and men cannot take a picture on the regular camera now because, okay, I get it. I'm putting it together.
Yes. It's really unhealthy for us. If I were to see my face next to yours right now, I'd be so distracted I wouldn't even be listening to you. We were made to look at each other, to interact with each other, to get feedback, not to look at ourselves. So really protect your brain. And the other parts of vitals are our relationships. We neglect it. We have to pour into healthy relationships because the unhealthy ones will drain our life source. And then the last V is vision. How do you plan joy in the future so you keep moving forward instead of getting stuck in the past? So this could be small. I plan joy every day. After I get my kid to school on time, on the days I have her, I'll sit in my living room and I have my Caribbean coffee and I enjoy it. I savor it because that's my time. But for someone else, it could be something else, right? So plan the joy. Celebrate your wins. When you meet a major milestone, right? Celebrate it as a team. You don't get that time back. So plan joy in the future.
What do you hope people walk away with after reading High Functioning?
I really hope that they understand that joy is a priority. It is a necessity. It is part of our survival, especially in our community. Without joy, what would have happened to us, So prioritize joy and understand the science of your happiness. There is only one you, and there will only ever be one you. So take the time to know yourself, understand what's taking away from your joy so you know where to add back to it. And joy has the power to change people and their communities. So, we all probably have interacted with people who are not joyful. They can change the tone of a room, right? So if we take the time to invest in joy, we can literally change not just ourselves, but our families, our communities, and I think the world.
How did they find you, Dr. Judith?
drjudithjoseph.com, and follow me on all the socials, Dr. Judith Joseph, and pick up my book, High Functioning.
Overcome your hidden depression and reclaim your joy. Thank you for joining me.
I love
Thank
it.
you so
for
much,
having
Dr.
me.
Judith Joseph. It's the Breakfast Club. Good morning. Thank you.
Wake that ass up.
Early in the morning.
The Breakfast Club.